Hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to my crafting corner. Today I'm going to show you how to knit. I've been teaching knitting for almost 10 years. What a better time than now to learn a new skill. In knitting, you have needles. They come in various sizes and they all have a number on them. The bigger the number, the larger the needle, and then the larger the knit will be. So the smaller the number, the smaller the needle, and the smaller the knit will be. They come in bamboo, plastic, and metal. I kind of recommend bamboo for the beginners because the yarn doesn't slip off as easily. But once you get the hang of it, I do find the metal to be the easiest when you get a good rhythm going. This is a skein of yarn. There's synthetic yarn and cotton yarn, and they're used for different things. I use synthetic yarn for most any of my craft items, and then I always use cotton yarn for my washcloths. To access your yarn, there's two strings. There's one that's hidden inside and then there's one on the outside. If you use the outside one, eventually you'll get into a big knot and it's not fun. So I always recommend starting with the inside string, and you might have to pull out some of the inside guts to get to the inside string, but that allows you to have continuous yarn that is free of knots. Another useful tool is a darning needle. This is a plastic one. They come in metal as well. But they have a large eye and they're usually pretty long and kind of thick for a needle. And this you can use to sew your pieces together. The first step is to make a slip knot. It's called a slip knot because when you tug on it, it comes undone. Form a loop with the yarn holding both ends in your hand. Twist the loop and pull the long thread through, and that creates your slip knot. Place the slip knot on your needle and pull it tight. This becomes your first stitch. To cast on your stitches, hold your hand out, hook the yarn over your thumb and pinky, and turn it towards yourself. Take the needle through the top string and pull slowly down over your thumb, creating your stitch. Continue until you get all the stitches that you need. There's 3 basic steps in knitting. You have a row of knots and hoops. You want the knots to be towards the bottom, and then you stick your needle in the first hoop, in and to the back. Take your yarn around and down in between the 2 needles. Then transfer the yarn to the back needle and then off of your front needle. So off and off. Again, that's into the back, around and down, off and off. The great thing about knitting is that it just repeats itself over and over again, and you do that with all of your stitches. Into the back, around and down, off and off. Then you just switch hands and do it again. Stick your knots at the bottom and go through each of your hoops. Casting off is how you finish your knitting piece. So you just knit 2 like normal, and then you take the bottom hoop and put it over the top hoop, and that helps kind of tie it off. Then you knit the next stitch like normal so that you have 2 on your needle, and again you take the bottom one over the top one. And you continue that process until you just have 1 stitch left on your needle. Then take a pair of scissors and cut your yarn. Take that string and feed it back through this hoop and pull tight. If you don't do this step, your whole thing could unravel, so make sure you tie it off here at the end. And voila, there's your knitting. One problem a lot of beginners run into is that their needle slips out and all of their stitches fall off. If this happens, do not panic. Don't pull any strings, and all you have to do is put your stitches back on your needles. You may have to re-knit a few, but you shouldn't have to completely start over. Another issue I see with beginners is knitting the first row. It is the hardest, I will tell you that. Sometimes as we're knitting the first row, we get this slack in between the stitches. And so the way to avoid that is to knit as tightly as you can for that first row. Or you can knit each stitch carrying that slack over, and at the very last stitch, just take it off. Another issue is knitting too tightly. A way to avoid this is after you've completed your off and off, give the yarn a little tug before you make your next stitch, and that should help keep the knits from being too tight. The first is a bracelet, and I like to recommend starting with this because it's a nice way to practice the knit and it's done quickly so you have your first project underway. For the bracelet, we're going to start with the slip knot and then cast on 5 more stitches for a total of 6 stitches. Then just knit each row like normal until you have a length of knitting that's long enough to fit around your wrist. Then you cast off by knitting 2 and taking the bottom stitch over the top until you're left with just 1 string. Cut your yarn and make sure to tie it off. Then you take one of the ends of yarn and thread it through your darning needle. Take the 2 ends and bring them together and sew all the way across. Take the 2 ends of yarn and tie them with a double knot. Cut the extra strings, turn it inside out, and there's your bracelet. What I always tell my students is that learning to knit is not so fun, but knitting is fun. So I challenge you to stick with it, rewatch the video, watch the hand movements carefully, and I promise you you'll get it and you'll have a lot of fun. Thanks for watching.